Hello, today we're going to make an over-the-toilet cabinet. I've searched the stores high and low looking for an over-the-toilet cabinet that would suit my application. I have a toilet that is a 10-inch rough-in, and there's just simply not enough room in the back for the prefabricated toilets, because there's usually a bar in the back for support that just won't fit between the wall and the toilet. So I've gone ahead and measured my application. The mirror next to this cabinet is 73 inches tall, so I wanted to make the cabinet an equivalent height. The toilet tank is 18 inches wide, so I'm going to make my shelf 20 inches wide to give an inch clearance on either side. I wanted to make this cabinet 7 inches deep, which means we'll have a little bit of a cutout here. That's so that anyone using the commode won't feel claustrophobic with shelves right behind them or on top of them. And to do this project, we're using hardwood. You can get hardwood from any local lumber store. This particular piece is a piece of poplar. It's 10 foot by 1 foot by 1 inch. Usual options are red oak, poplar. You can use whatever wood suits your application. It is much more expensive than softwood, so we're going to try to be as conservative as we can with our cuts. We're going to measure twice and cut once. Since I got two pieces that are 10 foot long, I should be able to trim the top off and use the excess pieces to make these shelves that go in between, or make these shelves for the cabinets, that is. I'm estimating that my first shelf is going to go approximately 42 inches from the ground. We're going to use 1 foot clearance on each shelf. So that gives us the next shelf at 54 inches, the third shelf at 66 inches. I'm going to go ahead and cut these two pieces down to 73 inches, and I will come back. Important thing to note is that I searched the store high and low for the best piece of wood that I could find, but there's always blemishes that, well, every piece of wood is going to have its blemishes. I picked the piece with the least amount of blemishes, and they're mostly at the ends, so I should be able to trim these off. And also, I'm using a compound miter saw that will allow me to cut at different angles. So when I cut the bottom here, I'm going to make sure that it's at least sloping 1 degree this way, 1 or 2 degrees this way, so that the top of the shelf will sit firmly against the wall behind the toilet. That'll prevent it from vibrating, wobbling, or potentially tipping over at a slight tug. I'm going to go ahead and make the first cuts, and I'll come back. Another friendly tip when cutting anything with a compound miter saw, or any saw for that matter, if you want to have clean cuts that don't have any burrs or wood chips on it, the best thing to have is a really sharp, high-grade blade in your saw. Even in that case, though, to prevent any nicks and burrs on the end, what I like to do is I will wrap the area that I'm going to cut in painter's tape. So I'm going to wrap this all the way around this edge, because I'm going to trim this edge off just to clean up these ends here. And putting that on there will, or should, protect it a little bit, and then when we cut through it, we can just take the tape off, and that should give us really clean edges with no nicks or burrs. Okay, we have cleaned the end off of what we hope to be, or what will be, the bottom of the shelf. We used our tape, and as you can see, even though I haven't replaced the saw blade, saws typically don't come with the highest grade saw blade, it's usually intermediate grade. It's a very clean cut thanks to our tape. What we've done is we've labeled the board. I like to label everything so that there's no confusion. I chose this to be the outside of the cabinet because this is this face of the board is nicer than the other side. This is the part that's going to go towards the wall. That's important to us because we put a slight angle on this cut so that the bathroom cabinet would slant slightly towards the wall, keeping it snug and stable. Since this is the back part of the wall, we're going to measure from the back, because that is where this board is going to be the shortest. So we want to make sure that that is at least 73 inches long. And here's where we're going to make our mark. And since this is hardwood and we plan to stain it and expose the surface, we're going to use tape. We're going to put a layer of tape on where we plan to make our marks so that the mark doesn't stain or ruin the wood. Now, right here is 73, so we're going to mark it like this. And on this side, same way. Like this. Now we're going to use a T-square to draw the line, and then we're ready to make our first major cut. Okay, I've cut all my pieces now. I have my two side beams that are going to make the outside of my shelf. They're cut, fastened together, I taped them together and used clamps. And I have the 3 equal-sized shelves cut and labeled. Shelf 1, top shelf 2, top shelf 3. These are going to have to be trimmed widthwise because I need to make the shelf narrower than I thought. So what we're going to do now is we're going to stencil, we're going to use tape and lay out this diagram onto this wood. And then we're going to cut the curved areas with a jigsaw deep enough that we can get into it with a circular saw. I'll come back once we get to that point. Okay, it may be hard to tell, but what we've done here is we've stenciled out the arched foot that I want to put on the bottom. This is how deep the recess is going to come in around the toilet. Stencil that all the way down. Then I have a curve here for the first shelf, which will be out about, I think that's 7 or 8 inches. Then I have this, the top portion is going to angle inward until it hits the top, which will be about 3 inches here. This is where my top shelf will be. That ledge there will give me 4 inches. And that pretty much follows this stencil diagram here. I added an extra shelf in that diagram though. So now that we have everything stenciled, what I've done is I've clamped both pieces of wood together with a whole set of clamps. So I have either end clamped as tightly as I can with these guys. This is where I'm going to make my first cut on the top with the jigsaw. So I wanted to make sure that the entire end is nice and snug. I've also gone ahead and fastened the wood using more clamps down to the sawhorses. So I have 4 clamps in all attaching the 2 pieces of wood to the sawhorse, and 4 clamps in all attaching the 2 pieces of wood together so that I can cut them both at the same time. Now I'm going to take the jigsaw out, I'm going to cut this curve, and then when I get in a little bit here, about 1 inch or 2, I'm going to use a circular saw to cut the straight portion all the way down to the next curve. I'll pick up from there. So after cutting the curves and the straight pieces with the jigsaw and the circular saw, your piece should look somewhat similar to this, if you're following my model, that is. If not, it should look like what you want it to look like. So we can see there's some rough spots here, here, and around these curves, which are going to need to be sanded off. But what I like to do after this is I'm going to pull my router out and roll the edges on these. If I can, I'm not sure how it'll work in these curves, but I'm going to flip them over so that the outside is exposed, not the inside, and then I'm going to round the edges. Then once that's all done, I'm going to sand my cuts, my curves, and the flat side so it'll be ready for staining and reassembly. I'll come back when we're ready for that. Now we have the shelves cut to fit. In my pattern, the top one's 3.5 inches, the middle one's 5.5 inches, and the bottom one's 7.5 inches. We have the outside posts left and right. They're cut, rounded with a router, and the next step is to drill the pilot holes. I'm going to use 2 screws on either side. So while these side pieces are bonded together still, I'm going to drill through both of them so that the left and right sides are at the exact same height, and the shelf should be even. After I drill the holes to support the shelves, I'm going to take all this wood off. I'm going to countersink the holes a little bit so that the screws will be recessed, and then I'm going to sand everything. And I'm also going to round the edges off on these shelves, the front of these shelves, to make it look a little more professional, and sand off any rough spots like these, and then we'll be ready to assemble and stain if we choose. Now, when you're done, it should look like this. Nice little shelf that goes above the toilet. It's got a nice clawfoot design. The edges are all rounded. Everything's smooth. We used 2 1 5/8 inch drywall screws to mount the shelves to the sides. 2 for each shelf to keep them sturdy from tipping. Everything's smooth and sanded. It's firm up against the wall. It's not going to shift or move. And the only thing left to do would be either to stain it or treat it, because it is in a wet area and it is a dry hard wood, so it's going to pick up watermarks if it's not stained or protected. So that'll be our next step. Other than that, it's done.